Today's story will completely change how you see ordinary people around you. The city's quietest flower shop owner, until a bomb was planted downtown and awakened her 25-year bomb disposal expert past. Tell us in comments which city you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe. These stories deserve to be heard. Margaret Chen opened her flower shop every morning at exactly 7 a.m., just as she had for the past 20 years. At 62, she moved with gentle precision through rows of roses, daisies, and lilies, arranging bouquets that brought smiles to faces across downtown Portland. To everyone, she was simply the kind flower lady. Her customers adored her soft-spoken manner and genuine care. Wedding bouquets, funeral arrangements, anniversary surprises, Margaret handled each order with the same quiet attention to detail. Her weathered hands moved through stems and petals like a pianist playing a familiar melody. What they didn't know was that those same gentle hands had once defused the most dangerous explosive devices in the world. For 25 years, Margaret Chen had been one of the Army's most elite explosive ordnance disposal specialists, serving in Iraq, Afghanistan, and classified operations across 3 continents. She'd retired after losing her hearing in one ear during a particularly complex defusal in Kandahar. The nightmares had stopped years ago, but her hands still remembered the weight of wire cutters, the texture of plastic explosives, the steady breathing required when death was one wrong move away. Now those same hands arranged flowers for Mrs. Patterson's weekly bouquet, helped young couples choose wedding centerpieces, and created memorial arrangements that brought comfort to grieving families. It was peaceful work, healing work, life instead of death. Tuesday morning started like any other. Margaret was preparing a large order for the Riverside Hotel when her phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Downtown evacuation ordered. Suspicious package reported. Avoid city center. She glanced out her window toward the government building 3 blocks away. Through her shop window, Margaret could see people hurrying past, some running, others looking confused and frightened. Police sirens wailed in the distance. She'd heard those sounds before in places where terror was a daily reality. Her pulse quickened, but her hands remained steady. Officer Jake Morrison burst through her door, breathing hard. "Ma'am, you need to evacuate immediately. We've got a confirmed explosive device at City Hall. Bomb squad's en route, but we're clearing a 6-block radius." Margaret nodded calmly, but something in her expression made him pause. "Officer," Margaret said quietly, "what type of device?" Morrison blinked, surprised by the technical nature of her question. We don't know yet. Military-style package, timer visible. Why do you ask?" Margaret was already moving toward her back room, her demeanor subtly shifting. "How long until the bomb squad arrives?" she asked, pulling out a small leather case from behind her cash register. Morrison checked his radio. 20 minutes, maybe more. Traffic's locked up." Margaret opened the case, revealing tools most florists would never own: wire cutters, multimeter, small mirrors. Morrison stared at the unfamiliar equipment. "Ma'am, what is that?" Margaret looked at him with eyes that suddenly seemed much older, much more serious. "Tools I hoped I'd never need again." She closed the case and tucked it into her jacket. "Tell me about the timer." "You can't be serious," Morrison said, understanding dawning. "Ma'am, this isn't a movie. That's a real bomb." Margaret smiled sadly. "Officer, I know exactly what it is. Digital display, probably showing countdown? Exposed wires, possibly red and blue? Military-grade packaging." Morrison's jaw dropped. Every detail matched. "How could you possibly know that?" Margaret locked her shop door and began walking towards City Hall. "Because I've seen this exact device before. Kirkuk, 2019. Same bomber, same signature. And I know how to stop it." As they walked briskly toward the government building, Margaret's entire demeanor transformed. Her gentle flower-arranging hands now moved with military precision, checking her tools, calculating distances, assessing the tactical situation with eyes that had seen too much. "Ma'am, I need to know who you are," Morrison demanded as they approached the police perimeter. Margaret stopped and looked directly at him. "Staff Sergeant Margaret Chen, 89th Explosive Ordnance Disposal Company, retired. 537 successful defusals. 0 failures." The police commander, Captain Rodriguez, initially refused to let a civilian near the device. But when Margaret began describing the bomber's methods, his previous targets, and the exact specifications of his preferred explosive compounds, Rodriguez realized he wasn't talking to an ordinary citizen. "This bomber calls himself the gardener," Margaret explained, the irony not lost on her. "He plants his devices like seeds, timing them for maximum psychological impact. He's been on the FBI's most wanted list for 8 years. This is his signature device." Through the police binoculars, Margaret studied the device planted at City Hall's main entrance. Her expression grew grim. 15 minutes on the timer, she announced. But that's not the real problem. He's using a dead man's switch configuration. Any vibration and it detonates immediately. The bomb squad leader, Sergeant First Class Williams, arrived and immediately clashed with the idea of a civilian involvement. "No way," he said firmly. "We follow protocol. Clear the area, use the robot, maintain safe distance." Margaret shook her head. "Your robot's too heavy. One wrong step." "Then what do you suggest?" Williams challenged. Margaret was already suiting up in borrowed protective gear, her movements automatic from decades of muscle memory. "I go in alone. Light footsteps, steady hands, and 25 years of experience with this exact bomber." Margaret approached the device with the same careful deliberation she used arranging delicate orchids. Each step was calculated, her breathing controlled, her focus absolute. The timer showed 11 minutes. Around her, the city held its breath. Kneeling beside the device, Margaret felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Hundreds of people evacuated, traffic stopped for miles, lives hanging in the balance. It was exactly like Kandahar, except this time, the people at risk were her neighbors. "Command, I can see the primary circuit," she radioed to the police perimeter. "Standard 3-wire configuration with mercury switch backup. The timer is legitimate, but there's a motion sensor integrated into the housing. Very sophisticated work." Margaret's hands moved with surgical precision, using her flower shop mirrors to examine angles without disturbing the device. 25 years ago, she defused an identical bomb in Iraq. The bomber had been using the same design for over a decade, his trademark ego. 8 minutes remaining, she announced, her voice steady, as if she were giving a weather report. She identified the decoy wires, the false circuits designed to kill anyone attempting disposal. But she'd seen this magician's tricks before. Using wire cutters that had saved lives in 6 different countries, Margaret began the delicate process of neutralization. First, the motion sensor, a tiny component that required the steady hands of someone who'd arranged thousands of fragile flower stems. "Primary sensor disabled," she reported. "Moving to timer circuit." Her breathing remained controlled, exactly as she'd trained decades ago. In her mind, she wasn't kneeling on City Hall steps. She was back in the desert, young and fearless, doing the job only she could do. With 4 minutes remaining, Margaret encountered the bomber's final surprise, a backup detonator hidden beneath the main circuit board. It was elegant, deadly, and designed to kill anyone who got this far. But Margaret had seen this trick before. 2 minutes, she whispered, not to the radio but to herself. Her hands moved like a surgeon's, isolating the final circuit while avoiding the pressure plate that would end everything. The same delicate touch she used separating rose petals now separated life from death. Margaret made the final cut with 37 seconds remaining. The timer stopped. The device went silent. For a moment, the only sound was her own breathing. Then quietly she announced, "Device neutralized. Area is safe." The police perimeter erupted in cheers, but Margaret simply sat back on her heels, exhausted. She'd returned to a world she'd left behind, used skills she'd hoped never to need again. But she'd done what needed to be done. As Margaret walked back toward the police line, her legs shaking slightly from adrenaline, Officer Morrison met her halfway. "Ma'am," he said, his voice full of awe, "you just saved thousands of lives." Margaret smiled tiredly. "I just did what I was trained to do." Captain Rodriguez approached with FBI agents who'd arrived during the defusal. "Sergeant Chen," one agent said, "we've been tracking the gardener for years. Your identification of his methods was crucial. How did you know?" Margaret removed her protective gear slowly, her hands finally showing the slight tremor that came after extreme stress. "Baghdad, 2018. Same device, same bomber. He killed 3 soldiers before I learned his patterns. I've been carrying that knowledge for 6 years. The FBI agent studied her with new respect. Your military record is heavily classified, but what we can see is impressive. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Army Commendation Medal. Why didn't you mention your background when you moved here? Margaret looked back toward her flower shop, where curious neighbors were beginning to gather. Because that life was over, she said simply. I came here to create beauty, not to defuse bombs. I arranged flowers because I was tired of dismantling death. As news crews arrived and crowds gathered, Margaret tried to slip away quietly. But Officer Morrison caught up with her. You can't just leave, he said. People deserve to know what you did. You're a hero. Margaret paused at her shop door, key in hand. Officer Morrison, she said gently, real heroes don't need to be announced. They just show up when they're needed. Today I was needed. Tomorrow, I'll go back to arranging flowers. The story broke nationally within hours. Flower shop owner saves city dominated headlines. Margaret's military service record, though partially classified, revealed a career of extraordinary courage and skill. The quiet flower lady had been hiding in plain sight. Colonel Patricia Hayes, Margaret's former commanding officer, called that evening. Maggie, she said, using Margaret's old Army nickname, I saw the news. Should have known you couldn't stay out of the game completely. Once EOD, always EOD. Margaret laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had all day. Pat, I spent 6 years arranging flowers, hoping I'd never see another bomb. Today reminded me why I loved the work and why I left it. The FBI captured the gardener 2 days later, using intelligence Margaret had provided about his methods and materials. Her identification of his signature techniques led to raids in 3 cities and the prevention of 4 additional attacks. Margaret returned to her flower shop the next morning, hoping for normalcy. Instead, she found dozens of bouquets left by grateful citizens, thank you cards from families, and a line of customers who'd never noticed her before but would never forget her now. Mrs. Patterson, her longtime customer, was waiting with tears in her eyes. Margaret, she said, I've been buying flowers from you for 15 years. I never knew. I'm so sorry we never really saw you. Margaret smiled and began arranging her usual Tuesday bouquet. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, approached Margaret's counter shyly. My daddy says you're a hero, she whispered. Margaret knelt to the girl's level. Sweetheart, heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes they wear uniforms, sometimes they arrange flowers. The mayor presented Margaret with the key to the city, which she accepted graciously, but privately. Local news wanted interviews, but she declined. My story isn't about me, she told reporters. It's about the fact that ordinary people do extraordinary things every day. 6 months later, Margaret still opened her shop at 7 a.m. sharp. She still arranged flowers with the same gentle precision. But now her customers saw her differently, not as the invisible flower lady, but as someone who'd carried unimaginable responsibility with quiet grace. A young veteran, recently returned from Afghanistan, entered her shop one afternoon. Margaret recognized the look in his eyes, the weight of things seen and done. Can I help you? She asked gently. He nodded toward her Purple Heart, now displayed discreetly behind the counter. Ma'am, he said quietly, I heard about what you did, and about your service. I'm having trouble adjusting, finding peace. Margaret set down her pruning shears and really looked at him. What's your name, soldier? They talked for an hour about the weight of military service, the challenge of returning to civilian life, and the healing power of creating rather than destroying. Margaret gave him a job in her shop, teaching him to arrange flowers with the same precision he'd once used for darker purposes. Margaret Chen never sought recognition for either of her careers, the military service that saved lives in war zones, or the quiet civilian life that brought beauty to her community. She just showed up, did what needed to be done, and went home. But her story spread among veterans, a quiet legend of someone who'd successfully transitioned from war to peace, who'd found healing in flowers after years of dealing with explosives. She became proof that warriors could also be gardeners. Today, Margaret's flower shop serves as an informal gathering place for veterans learning to arrange flowers instead of dismantle bombs, to plant gardens instead of navigate minefields. Her quiet strength continues to save lives, one conversation at a time. Margaret Chen taught us that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear aprons and arrange flowers. She proved that the same hands trained for war can create peace, that deadly skills can become healing arts. Share this story to honor all the hidden heroes around us, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the extraordinary in the ordinary.